welcome back to Perspectiva. Now, we are tracking a major development coming out of the Arabian Sea. The intense search operation for the K2 Airways Flight 1732, the Boeing 737-400 cargo aircraft that went missing late Tuesday night while en route from Sharjah to Karachi, has led to a critical discovery. Well, the Pakistan Navy and maritime security agencies have successfully located and recovered pieces of the aircraft's wreckage in the deep sea, approximately 53 nautical miles south of the coastal town of Omara. Well, the 27-year-old freighter carrying 5 crew members had vanished from radar screens just 3 minutes after reporting a severe navigational system fault to Karachi Air Traffic Control. Well, flight tracking data paints a chaotic final sequence showing erratic altitude shifts and a final vertical terminal plunge. Well, the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has expressed deep grief over the tragedy, and while the hunt for the missing fuselage and the 5 missing crew members remains, in tough monsoon seas, aviation investigators are shifting focus to what exactly caused this. While it's too early to declare a definitive cause, the incident has sparked a widespread speculation. Analysts are pointing to structural or mechanical system failures, but another angle cannot be ignored: the massive surge in regional electronic warfare. All across conflict zones adjacent to these flight paths, military forces regularly deploy high-powered GPS jamming and spoofing to intercept drones and missiles. Can these invisible electronic barriers completely blind a civilian aircraft's instruments, or are we looking at a tragic internal mechanical failure? Well, let's take a closer look at how modern air safety is facing a silent but growing threat.
As military conflicts increasingly move into the electronic domain, aviation experts are warning that a new threat is quietly affecting civilian air travel. GPS jamming and GPS spoofing, once largely associated with military operations, are now disrupting hundreds of commercial flights every day, raising concerns about flight safety, pilot workload, and the future of air navigation. A modern airliner cruising safely at 36,000 feet suddenly receives an urgent cockpit warning. Pull up, terrain, pull up, but there is no mountain below, only a false signal. According to aviation experts, electronic warfare is increasingly sowing confusion in civilian cockpits as GPS interference spreads across conflict zones in the Middle East, the Black Sea, the Baltic region, and parts of Asia. Military forces use electronic warfare to jam or spoof satellite navigation signals in order to disrupt enemy drones and missiles. However, civilian aircraft operating nearby can also become unintended victims. Experts explain that GPS jamming blocks satellite signals, making them unavailable, while GPS spoofing is even more deceptive, sending fake navigation signals that trick an aircraft into believing it is somewhere it is not. Pilots report seeing aircraft maps suddenly shift miles away from their actual position, false terrain warnings sounding without danger, clocks losing accurate time, and navigation systems displaying conflicting information. Although commercial aircraft are equipped with multiple backup systems, including inertial navigation, onboard sensors, radar, and ground-based navigation aids, GPS today supports many critical aircraft functions, meaning interference can affect several systems at once. According to aviation researchers, around 900 commercial flights every day are now affected by some form of GPS interference worldwide, with the highest concentration occurring near active conflict zones. Airline pilots say the growing problem is increasing workload inside the cockpit. Instead of relying on automated navigation, crews often revert to traditional navigation techniques, carefully cross-checking multiple instruments while maintaining communication with air traffic control. The concern is not simply operational disruption. Aviation experts warn that repeated false alerts could gradually reduce pilots' confidence in onboard warning systems, increasing the risk of confusion during genuine emergencies. The issue gained international attention following the December 2024 Azerbaijan Airlines crash. Investigators reported that the flight experienced electronic interference and lost GPS capability while attempting to land. Although investigators concluded that GPS interference was not the primary cause of the accident, experts say it complicated the flight and contributed to the chain of events before the crash. Authorities across Europe and international aviation organizations are now developing new procedures to help pilots recognize GPS interference more quickly, improve coordination with air traffic control, and strengthen aircraft resilience against electronic attacks. Aircraft manufacturers are also exploring new technologies, including anti-jamming antennas, enhanced software capable of detecting false navigation signals, and improved satellite navigation systems designed to authenticate GPS data. Experts emphasize that passengers should not panic. Modern airliners are designed with multiple layers of redundancy, and pilots receive extensive training to safely manage GPS failures and navigation disruptions. But as electronic warfare becomes an increasingly common feature of modern conflicts, aviation specialists say protecting civilian aircraft from GPS interference is becoming one of the industry's most urgent technological and operational challenges. As military conflicts evolve beyond conventional battlefields, experts say safeguarding civilian aviation from electronic warfare will require international cooperation, stronger aircraft systems, and continued pilot training to ensure the skies remain safe for millions of passengers every day.
Well, to analyse the technical complexities of this tragedy, the chaotic final flight and the potential impact of regional electronic warfare and modern cockpits, we're now joined by Mr. Fahad Ibn Masood, a respected aviation expert. Mr. Fahad, thank you so much for joining us today. So the K2 Airways cargo aircraft explicitly informed air traffic control of a navigational system fault before the contact broke off. In a modern cockpit, how severe must a navigation error be to prompt an emergency call? And what does it tell us about the initial minutes of this emergency?
So, a pretty loaded question from your side, but in a good way. I would take this to the navigation fault first. It sounds just like one thing, but it's really an umbrella term. It can be a GPS glitch, an IRU, which is being talked of right now as the inertial reference unit. Those are avionics which tell the aircraft's position, but more importantly, its attitude, being vertically straight or in a roll or in a bank. Basically, whether it's flying upside up, climbing or diving, independent of satellites. In this situation, what jumps out to me very appropriately is the timeline. Fault reported, ATC guided them in. 3 minutes later, the plane is in a very rapid descent, and it's a very, very tight window for things to fall apart. There's certain chatter that's going around in pilot circles, not confirmed, just chatter, that this specific aircraft had an IRU or an inertial reference unit issue on ground in Sharjah before the flight, possibly flying with a reduced backup. If this is true, the remaining unit then failed in the air as well. We're potentially looking at a total loss of attitude reference, that too at night, over water, sea, nothing outside to look at. And that combination is a recipe for something that we call in aviation as spatial disorientation, which I'll touch upon in a second later as well. I want to be very upfront here that this is a hypothesis and floating around online, not something which is very confirmed. It does fit the shape of what we're seeing in the data or the statistics that are there, but only the black box, or as we know as the FDCVR, flight data cockpit voice recorder, can actually tell us what really went on in those final few moments.
And sir, the flight tracking data does show an incredibly erratic altitude change, followed by a sudden near vertical terminal dive. From an aerodynamic and a piloting perspective, what specific failures or scenarios could force a Boeing 737 into that kind of extreme flight profile?
Right, so this is where the theory and data start lining up. And I think it's a good moment to demystify the spatial disorientation, which I talked of before as well, because that's a key piece here. The tracking that we've seen from Flight Radar 24 shows a descent from a cruise, initially 35,000, coming down, then climbing back up, and then really a very final steep dive down to about the last reading, which was at 1100 feet above mean sea level. With 22,400 feet per minute rate of descent or vertical velocity, an extreme number in any case. So spatial disorientation, it really does mean in simple terms, when a pilot's inner sense of balance, the inner ear, and the motion outside gives them false information about which way is vertically up. And they can't really correct it because they've got nothing outside to visually confirm it against, especially at night over water, open seas, with no light and no horizon, no stars, and if it's overcast, that's an even more grave situation. The human brain is genuinely bad at telling level flight from a slow turn or a gentle climb. Using the feel alone, pilots are trained in this case to trust the instruments precisely because of this. But if the instrument that shows attitude, which is the AH or the artificial horizon, fed in turn by the IRU or the initial reference unit, itself is, if it's giving false readings, we're not going to get any correct references, and worst possible combination, one, there is no outside reference, two, an instrument that we can't trust either, both have failed. That's exactly the scenario that the pilot community theory describes. Lose both IRUs, lose AH, artificial horizon, and at night with zero visual cues, a crew can genuinely lose track which way is up. So historically, disorientation produces exactly this pattern: climb, drift, overcorrect, and then eventually an uncontrolled steep dive, which lines up with what we are seeing on the data. On the older jet angle too, this 737-400 has a more old school system rather than the new NGs or the 737 next generation aircrafts. The GPS directly feeds into the flight computer position picture. This classic series jet leans much more onto the IRUs and ground radio beacons instead. So GPS jamming wouldn't hit the aircraft's navigation in the same way. This is really a vulnerability where the IRU themselves have failed. Structural failures on a controlled or a control problem are not off the table as well. Bottom line, in my humble opinion, data shows what happened. The recorders will show, or the FDCVRs will show, or the black box will show the why, which is one of the most important questions in any air crash investigation till date.
Well, sir, given the timing of this crash, alongside heavy military escalations, particularly the recent US strikes on Iran, how realistic is the possibility that electronic warfare or military-grade GPS interference bled over into this civilian trade route?
A very, very contemporary question for now, in present time and stage. I want to clear this as well. Jamming side, yes, it's confirmed. Flight 24 or Flight Radar 24 said this aircraft, along with others, hit a global navigation satellite system or GNSS interference right after leaving Sharjah. That is real, but that was near the start of a 2-hour flight and then the fault came rather near Karachi and the coastline of Pakistan in the end. So no confirmed link between the two. They might just be unrelated events in the same night. And like I said, because this was an older classic 737 with limited GPS integration, jamming alone probably wasn't going to cripple its navigation the way might do on the newer versions, on the NGs that we have. So that probability is rather shakier than it sounds at first. Now, separately, I want to knock down something that's been doing circles on the social media. The claims that are there that this plane was shot down by US forces or Iranian forces, zero credibility on source wise. Not the airline nor the PCA has given any information indicator on the on this story being true. Nothing's been documented, but everything has been data verified, and it's pointing towards the mechanical and navigational story, possibly involving spatial disorientation, as I mentioned before, after the instrument failure or the avionics. But it certainly is not a strike. I'd encourage people not to forward that story ahead. It's kind of a thing that just adds pain for the families without any basis and reality behind it.
And so modern commercial airliners are built with layered redundancies. If a Boeing 737 completely loses its GPS data link, can it comfortably rely on alternative ground-based navigation systems, or can widespread regional interference completely overwhelm those backups?
So it's a technical question. Jamming in itself is a very blunt situation, where the frequency is flooded with a lot of information. Pilots are getting clear GPS unavailable situations. Spoofing, on the other hand, is more sneakier. It feeds the receiver a fake signal that looks legit. So the system reports a position, but just the wrong position, with no obvious warning. So in this case, either way, crews are trained to cross-check, compare GPS against the IRUs, ground beacons, as well as ATC radar can vector them or give them correct directions. And again, on this particular aircraft, GPS wasn't even the primary input for the flight computer. So GPS problem wouldn't be the deal breaker here. The real vulnerability, if this theory holds up, is the IRUs which have failed, because they feed the attitude displays, and that's one system we absolutely cannot lose at night over water without risking spatial disorientation.
Well, so we're seeing an undeniable global spike in severe GPS interference surrounding conflict zones. Do international aviation bodies need to radically redefine safety guidelines, and should cargo and commercial airlines begin completely avoiding corridors adjacent to active military friction points?
So these are points to ponder for both the regulatory body as well as the airlines themselves, the flight operations. There have been workarounds for this. The airlines have found various ways to cater for these challenging situations, especially if they're having more fuel on board. They will have to fly longer distances, greater ranges, greater time, greater costs in the process. So overall, this is a sad situation where conflicts are brewing, may it be in the Russia-Ukraine side or the American-US conflict. And there are solutions to this, and found briefings done to the flight crew, the cabin crew, the flight operations are catering for this. They are circumnavigating these areas, but they are greater costs or greater expenses and greater times for the passenger to fly across from origin to destination.
Mr. Fahad, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Well, that is all for today's edition of Perspectiva. Our thanks go to our guests for sharing their vital expertise on the breaking military escalations in the Middle East, and for shedding light on the technical factors behind the tragic loss of the K2 cargo plane. Well, for more stories, please follow us on social media or visit AsiaOne News TV. Thank you for watching. I'm Philpot, and we'll see you next time.